All right. It's 4 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. For those of you who don't know me, I am Kevin McKeever, also known as Rhonda's husband, a.k.a. husband of the woman who is the chairman of Cure JM Foundation. And we're doing something a little new. We are doing live streaming. So everyone turn around and wave to the camera, say hi. We have at least a dozen viewers right now, hopefully a few more. And this is how dangerous this is. I'm gonna do this. Someone handed me Milk Duds before I came up here, which is not a good thing to be chewing while you're attempting to speak in a microphone. Dr. Levy, who is from Dell's Children's Hospital, it's a local children's hospital here, who is going to be addressing the new ways to manage sunscreen and sun exposure. He is running late. So I've been told someone's waiting at the door to bring him in when he comes in. So you're stuck with me for the next 5-10 minutes until he shows up. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my own experience with sun exposure and my daughter. My daughter Megan was diagnosed in 2002. She was about 2 years old. We were living in Dallas at the time. And one of the first things when we got the diagnosis was all about sun exposure can be a key trigger to activating the juvenile myositis disease in children who have it. And living in Dallas, how many people here are from Texas? I know there are a lot of people from Texas, and that's where we're at. Yeah. Trying to stay out of the sun in Texas year-round is not an easy thing. In Connecticut, where I live now, it's not so hard because in the wintertime, as I like to joke, right after Trump got elected, we didn't have sun for 2 weeks up in Connecticut because we were very heavily Democratic. So that wasn't quite a bad deal. But how many, why don't you tell me a little bit about what your struggles have been with keeping your children out of the sun? Does everyone have young children? How many have kids who are single digits, 6, 7, 6, 5, younger than that? Trying to put sunscreen on little kids. Not an easy thing, right? Okay, how many of you have bought bathing suits that are kind of like full exposure, full coverage bathing suits, shirts, tops? Yeah, those I will tell you right away are a godsend. I even had even before Megan got diagnosed with juvenile myositis, we got her those for the exact reason because living in Dallas and every time we went out to the pool and trying to put sunscreen on her, that was a chore. And I read about them online and we got them from. I think it was a company in Australia was making them, but now they're a lot more prevalent. It's a lot easier to find them. So that is a big, big help. Hats, getting your kids to wear hats. Yes, yeah. Where do you guys get your hats from? I know Sombrella was one that we used to get stuff from all the time. Amazon.com. If Amazon.com doesn't have it, it usually means it's not out there, I've learned. Anybody else? Coolie Bar, yeah, Coolie Bar, we got to buy stuff. I wear hats from Coolie Bar now. I do that mostly to cover my thinning hair, but they are very helpful too. Anybody else? The more coverage you can give them, the better. I know, I have this struggle with my daughter, who's 17 now, about trying to get away with just wearing a baseball hat. That's good for covering your forehead and your nose, but it doesn't give your back of your neck any coverage. If you got really long hair, that's not so much of an issue. But if you're like someone like me who's got short hair, you need a wider brim hat. So that is very helpful. If they have long hair in the back that covers their ears and their neck, it's not quite as much as an issue. Then you probably need more coverage in the front. But again, baseball hat brims are only usually about that long. You can buy hats that have longer brims that are specifically for that. A lot of those also have those little the flaps that go in the back, like safari hats almost. Those are helpful. My daughter used to wear those for a while. Yeah. I always tell them, and the thing is now hats have come back a lot, so it's not quite a big thing about making your kid wear a hat when she's outside. I know one thing that we did is we offered with her preschool and with her kindergarten, because she used to have to wear hats whenever they go outside and stuff. We offered to get everybody baseball hats or something, so she didn't feel like she was alone out there. because their baseball hats are cheap and whatever, and it's a hat, so at least it's something that everyone's wearing so that she didn't feel alone out there. Same thing with sunglasses. Do you have your kids wear sunglasses? Sunglasses are very important for several reasons. If your kids are on prednisone or Solumedrol, which is the IV prednisone, your doctors have probably warned you they need to get checked for cataracts on a regular basis because that's one of the side effects of them. Wearing sunglasses help, especially polarized ones that give you UV protection for your eyes. So that's a very important thing to have. It also gives you coverage both on your eyelids and gives you extra coverage around your eyes, so that's a little extra protection. Yes?
So, not sunglasses, but we found out from our school nurse
Mhm.
that they make these lenses called, like a blue tech, it's called blue tech lens.
Mm-hmm.
And so my daughter is sensitive to like fluorescent lighting at school and also outside.
Mm-hmm.
So we ordered her a pair of glasses that it's just plain glass because she doesn't have vision problems. And they put this blue tech coating on them and it blocks UV light for her.
Does she need a
And so
mic?
she doesn't get as much headaches from the sun.
I forgot. You're also, if you ask a question, you're supposed to have the mic so they can hear you on on the thing. But that's my job. When Dr. Levy comes, I don't have to stand here and entertain you. Okay, so I never heard of that before.
I hadn't either, the school nurses told me about it.
Really? Okay, that's interesting. All right. Let's see. Finding the right sunscreen for your child. How many types of brands of sunscreen have you gone through to find one that your kid or you like? 2? Okay. Do you guys ever see the environmental working group? They put out a big sunscreen study every year about what are the best sunscreens to use, in terms of using the chemicals and all that stuff and on that. I would say, you could read that list and just go insane because there's like 1,000 different brands on there. And the first thing you're going to notice is all the brands they recommend are brands you've never seen before, because they're all things you can usually only find online or in specialty stores because they're all these organic ones that don't use any of the chemicals. They all have titanium dioxide and zinc oxide in them because they're supposed to be, again, less disruptive to hormones and skin and everything. Oh, here comes Dr. Levy. I'll turn it over to him in a minute. My advice for you, try them. Find something that your kid will wear. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's got, whether it's a chemical sunscreen or it's a physical block with zinc oxide in it. Whichever one you can actually get on them that stays on them, I find is the best sunscreen. So, and with that, Dr. Levy? Levy, sorry. No, come on in. Come on in. And now, everyone, Dr. Levy.
No, you did. You did it. How are you?
Good. How are you?
How's everybody? Sorry, I won't use it. What's that?
You're online. Live stream.
Oh, really? And nobody face the camera. No. So anyhow, sorry I'm late. I've been here 9 years from Houston, and I swear the traffic is 10 times worse here than Houston, for those who know the two places. So to kick this off, hey, big guy. Says he's not here, not to talk to me. Who put on sunscreen today? Did you reapply it? Okay. As I came in, the discussion was really, and I think quite appropriately, whatever you can get on is the thing. And who was down at the hospital today at all? Everybody here all day thus far? Okay, well, one thing, first of all, I'm a pediatric dermatologist and trained as a pediatrician, and then took a turn and went off into dermatology and actually deal most of the time with a variety of unusual inherited skin diseases. And when I learned that my younger associate, Dr. Diaz, was not able to give the talk today or this session, then it fell to me. And as I told the folks this morning when I spoke, I came to the realization after preparing my lecture for this morning that I actually knew not as much as I thought perhaps I should have known about this group of disorders, beyond just what they look like. And as I told people this morning, and this is going to be applicable to you all, one of the reasons many of us go into academic medicine is not just because we tend to see more of the different and perhaps more interesting cases and the like, but it's to be constantly challenged so that hopefully we continue to learn new things. I mean, most of us have spent quite a while in school and learning things. And the reason I say it's applicable to talking to a patient and family advocacy group such as yours is I really feel like I get more out of these interactions than I give. And I mean that in all sincerity. You know, the discussion that you began, Kevin, yes, I did remember. The Alzheimer's is not there yet. Is appropriate. I think like the question came up today about, well, what's sunscreen and what do you tell people? And the bottom line is use them. And I brought a little flyer if you want it. You may pitch it, but everyone hears about using an SPF of 30 or more. Do you know why, what that number is about? Yes?
Doesn't that mean that you can stay in the sun 30% longer? Like if it's SPF 30, then you would before you start burning?
Exactly. 30. It's actually 30 times longer, but it's a bit artificial. And it's sun protection factor, and in fact, the way those whole things are calculated, those numbers are calculated is, and I remembered actually being a participant in early sunscreen trials, earning very little money as a medical student, and what they would do is calculate what's called an MED, minimal erythema dose, and they would literally irradiate 1 centimeter, basically kind of half-inch squares on our back with ultraviolet light, the shortwave UVB, and see how long it took for us, and it obviously varied based upon your skin type, how long it takes for you to turn pink. And then the sunscreen would be applied, and based upon how much longer, that's where those numbers come from. The importance of 30 is, well, I'll show you. Class is in session. If you care. So we'll say 4, 10, 15, 30, and then I'm making up 60. And my line is probably not quite right. But basically, this is the absorption up here, the protection, if you will. If you go from a 15 to 30, well, if you go from a 4 to a 15, you see your protection is pretty steep. Okay, you're basically getting nothing down here, something substantial here. At 30, you're getting about 95 to 97% protection from ultraviolet rays. And I'll talk about A versus B in a second. So 95 to 97% ain't bad. Now, is a 60 better? Is 100? Of course it is. And there may be certain circumstances where, in fact, we'll ask people to be on some of those exceedingly high-numbered sunscreens. You might argue with the group of diseases that you all are dealing with, you might say, well, this is, and as you know, the amount of photosensitivity, sun or light sensitivity, varies even between each of yourselves, if you're affected, or your children or grandchildren. What one kiddo with the same skin type, complexion, will tolerate varies. So and then you add in, like there are some photosensitizing medications that people may be on. For instance, if someone needs, something I deal with, not uncommonly, acne. It's not uncommon to prescribe an antibiotic called doxycycline for acne. Works pretty well. It's known to be a sun sensitizer. So might that be the appropriate choice to give to a child with a form of myositis, or dermatomyositis specifically? Maybe not. So you need to think about those things. But if a sun, and there are other examples, you might then choose, for instance, a higher number. That's all that means. Now, importantly, not too long ago, the government mandated some changes in labeling. And to be able to say that a sunscreen is broad spectrum, they must not only show efficacy against the short or burning rays, that's UVB. Let's see, can we just say B is bad? They're both bad. But as well, UVA, the longer wavelengths of ultraviolet light. And those are the ones that penetrate more deeply into our skin, don't typically cause burn, but cause more of the photoaging, like my forearms look like after years of unprotected sun exposure growing up, having grown up in Houston and spending time on the beach in Galveston before there were sunscreens, okay? The other issue is all sunscreens in terms of duration of efficacy, if you will, can only be labeled as providing protection at whatever level they claim for 40 or 80 minutes. Now, at the very least, they ought to be applied, if you're going to be doing it, strictly speaking, as you might imagine, every couple of hours. Now, if you're in and out of the pool or in and out of the lake, here, in and out of the ocean, you're a heavy sweater, perhaps more frequent. How much sunscreen should you apply? What's that? Shot glass. See, shot glass is good for two things, right? But that's right. In a shot glass, that's a good solid ounce. And obviously, for someone his age, it's probably going to be a child-sized shot glass. But the idea is you want enough to cover the body completely, and importantly, and ideally, to apply this sunscreen before you go outside. Ideally, about 20 minutes before you go outside. Okay? One other point I made this morning is, and I'm kind of rapping on myself and my pediatric colleagues, we like to think that we, like when you take your kids or your grandkids to their pediatrician and you get counseling about brush your teeth and get your immunizations and do this, that, and the other. What's been shown pretty clearly is we don't do a particularly great job educating about sun protection, and that's been studied, and the missing link really is engaging the parents actively in it. And needless to say, with what I do every day in my work, that is a question I pose, and I'll usually, before talking to the child, if they're old enough to respond to me, I'll ask the parent, do you put sunscreen on every day? And you can tell immediately, like some of them, they're like this. It's like, no, you're not going to be punished. But the point is, needless to say, at some point in life, we figure out we're doing what our parents, it's like, oh my God, I'm acting like my mom. And I think in this regard, that's a good thing. So I think that's something particularly for this group of individuals that it really ought to be done. There must have been a question, Kevin, that you got about which sunscreen? Okay. I'm going to ask you first, preferences you folks have about particular sunscreens? Yes.
I have a question about the spray versus applying.
Okay.
I really don't like applying sunscreen, but I do the spray.
Okay.
Does it hurt, would you say?
Yeah. Quite everyone heard the question about spray versus lotion or gels or liquids and so forth. I have no problems with spray. I like spray. In fact, I'm like you in that regard. When I like bay fishing in Matagorda Bay, south of here. And it's an easy application. Need to be a little heavy-handed with the spray to get an adequate amount on. The only problem with the sprays is, again, getting back to the younger children, is you don't want that spray being inhaled. It's not great, okay? So, I mean, what do you do in that regard with the spray? How would you handle that problem about inhalation?
Like there's small towels.
Yeah. Well, or for you, hopefully you're not doing this.
I spray it in my hand.
Exactly. Exactly. So then you just put it on like that, and then it's like any other product. I agree with you. Yep.
Are the face sticks just as
Yeah, those sticks work very well. My wife loves those. She prefers those, and they're great. And has anyone had problems, yourselves or children, grandchildren, with allergic reactions to any of the sunscreens? What's happened?
There have been certain brands that we've used that she gets this really like rash around her face. It's like a really small red dots
Yeah.
around her face, and so we just trial and error, just tried new brands until we quit seeing that.
But not elsewhere?
Just on the face.
Okay. And do those tend to, what type of base? Is it a lotion, a solution, a thick paste or cream?
I believe it was a copper tone face stick that looks kind of like Vaseline.
Okay. Okay.
And that's different. We would use different on her face versus different on her body. So I think
Gotcha.
that's maybe why we only saw it on the face.
Okay. And the reason I ask is the more occlusive ones, like a thick paste or Vaseline, as you said, you might be more apt to actually end up having, and it's not a big issue in most cases, obstruction of the hair follicles and sweat glands and almost get a prickly heat type thing. There are, when you talk about chemical-based versus non-chemical-based, that's a bit of a misnomer, quite honestly. The traditional sunscreens, as I like describing them, on the one hand, have compounds that end in ATE, the ATEs, cinnamates, for instance, are the ONEs, the ONEs, the benzophenones or oxybenzone in particular. And the reason I bring those up is that if people are going to develop an allergy, a true allergic contact dermatitis to a sunscreen product, it's usually the ONEs and not the ATEs. So in the way you begin to get concerned about there being an allergic contact dermatitis, for instance, is, gee, I've been using this product for weeks and months or years, and now every bloody time I put it on, it's red and itchy. That can happen to any of us with anything we put on our skin with regularity. Prescription med, plain moisturizer, or sunscreen in this instance. And in that situation, and Dr. Pockman from Northwestern, who was one of the speakers this morning, brought up in open forum that she tends to have less problems with the titanium or zinc oxide based products, the non-chemical. It's a bit of a misnomer because they're all chemicals. But those tend to be associated with less of that allergic contact dermatitis risk. In fact, I've never seen it, never heard of it. I'm sure it's going to happen as they get more and more popular. Some people have brought up concerns about use of some of the sunscreens that contain nanoparticle, if you hear about that, nanoparticle delivery systems. Good news is they get into the skin very thoroughly. Bad news is people are concerned, public is concerned about toxicity from nanoparticles from those products getting into the body. And I'll tell you, having read that literature, there's another patient advocacy group that I am involved with where these kids and adults have a genetic predisposition to extreme sun sensitivity, photosensitivity. And they're very concerned about it because in that population, another problem that they have is a real predisposition for malignancy. So inherently with that condition. So here they're talking about nanoparticles, and I will tell you, having read and prepared for that meeting, it's not at all clear with the literature. In fact, I will tell you, for me, it's not clear enough to advise against their use, but again, for people who are concerned about them, there are plenty of options, for God's sake. And again, getting back to, in particular, the zinc or titanium dioxide based products. Has anyone heard about oral sunscreens? What? That's what I say. That's exactly what I say. What have you heard about them? I'm going to keep picking on you.
Oh, man. Okay. I have heard about the oral, and I've heard about something that you can insert underneath your skin, and I have been told that they haven't found that they've been effective, but if they are, I'm very interested.
No, and I'm glad you made that point. And there was actually just a very nice presentation at a meeting I was at, I guess, 3 weeks ago, where a friend of mine did a very nice presentation within sort of an overall review of the literature. And I would say it's not ready for prime time. I mean, it's very interesting, the idea of our being able to eat something that is, biologically safe and gets to the heart of the matter and provides us with additional sun protection. At this point, I'm like you. What? I mean, I agree. It's not there yet. So, what other options do we have for sun protection? Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about SPF through clothing and other effects?
See, we work well together. That's exactly where I was going. Question one is about SPF with clothing. I'm embarrassed to tell you, until Christmas a year ago, when we were with our best friends on the beach in Costa Rica, I had never come close to purchasing any of those very effective and very comfortable UV protective sportswear. They're wonderful, and they're quite effective. And to my knowledge, people haven't developed any irritancy to them. I mean, I found it awesome and totally comfortable swimming, whether it was in the pool, lake, in that case, in the ocean. I think they're wonderful. So I think that, depending on how much exposed skin you have, plus sunscreen, hat, good wide-brimmed hat, that's important. I mean, I wear baseball caps all the time, not to pick on you with the baseball cap, but needless to say, that's useful for this part of the face. And needless to say, literally, people have looked at how wide the brim of a cap needs to be, and it's several inches, as you might imagine, to get around our head and provide adequate protection. The other thing is, there are products that you can buy for the clothes that we wear every day, if you're so inclined, that you can add as a rinse in the washing machine that provide additional protection. Now, as you might imagine, after many washes, they tend to rinse out, but you can repeat the thing. And there are several of these now that you can find, and some of the stores have them, but you can go online and find them. The bottom line is there are plenty of options. And I think how aggressive you all choose to be with any of these practices, particularly with what you're dealing with your children and grandchildren, is going to depend on how exquisitely sun-sensitive they are, on the one hand. On the other hand, as I mentioned this morning, and you've probably heard from your physicians, even if the kids and grandkids are not particularly photosensitive, like very exquisitely sensitive skin, another important reason to exercise diligent, daily, repetitive sun protection is because there are clear data both with the group of disorders under myositis, but with lupus, another condition that I know you all are aware of, that UV exposure on the skin can worsen the systemic manifestations. There's no question about that. It alters immune function, more importantly, creates further immune dysfunction. So not just to have nice, youthful skin for a longer period of time, but I think also looking at trying to modify the chance of development of internal problems or worsening of already existing internal problems. That's another reason to engage in these practices. What else? Yep.
So, wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Okay, so the way that, just to go back to the SPF discussion for
Yep.
a moment. So 30 times, 60 times, that's what SPF is.
Yep, yep.
So let's just say, unprotected skin will burn at 4 minutes. SPF 30 means now that the person has 2 hours, about 120 minutes before they begin to burn. But you're saying
In
that
a laboratory-controlled situation.
Sure, absent sweat,
Yep,
moisture,
yep.
those kinds of things, right. But what you're saying is that the lotion is only effective for 40 to 80 minutes.
Well, it doesn't matter whether it's lotion, spray, gel, solution, what have you. That is true under an idealized situation. If you put something on, you should get that longer. But the reality of it is, and this is where it gets to the labeling, it's really 40 or 80 minutes. And no one can claim like all day, waterproof. In fact, you cannot say waterproof anymore because none of them is waterproof. So that business of 30 times what you had unprotected, again, is real in terms of very controlled, idealized laboratory, like I was exposed to as a medical student. But the reality is, and I think it probably comes down, quite honestly, more to the base and how the products are constituted ultimately, it's not real in that regard. I mean, in terms of how much longer.
So a better thing to do really is just, I understand what you're saying. So SPF 30 is better, maybe SPF 60 is even better. But ultimately, whatever it is, you're going to need to reapply every 40 to...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And again, maybe just think of it in terms of the 30 giving you 95 to 97% protection against UV rays, and forget about the duration. Forget about how the SPF was derived and think more about the percentage of protection that it provides us.
Okay.
Okay? Thanks for bringing that up.
I was going to say the best way I explained it to my kids when I had explained it to my daughter is like you open up a soda, and the carbonation, it's really strong at the beginning, and then it just slowly fades out and it ends. It's the same thing. You think of the sunscreen as the same way. You put it on, you get all that protection when it first comes on, and then the bubbles are just slowly wear away until you have nothing.
I like that. I'm going to quote you. No, I mean it. I think that's a
For this,
useful.
they
That's
take me for
useful.
this session for a reason.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. Yep.
It's a three-part question. Well, first, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. The first is, are there any don'ts based on your experience, whether it's with juvenile myositis or just don't do this period in terms of sun protection? And then the second thing is, what is your best recommendation for post-sun exposure? So as much as I'd like to think we do a great job keeping our son protected, he's out there running, sweating, playing soccer for 2 hours. He comes in and he's red. So what is your post recommendation? And then the third is, I haven't really seen anything, and it could be out of my own lack of research. Are there any biologics or topical treatments for the dermal, facial, and other types of skin variations or conditions, such as on the knuckles or on the elbows or on the knees, Is there any biologics or creams or treatments that you're aware of that may be helpful in treating this condition?
So I'm going to go 3, 2, 1 because here the Alzheimer's is kicking in. Let me just ask a clarifying question, as they say. With regard to the last issue, you talking about the skin manifestations that are part and parcel of, okay, so like the Gottron's papules and the red patches here, there, and everywhere. And are you asking specifically beyond prescription items, like topical cortisones, topical calcineurin inhibitors? Okay, so for those who are not opposed to using prescription medicines, even over-the-counter medicines, low and mid-potency topical steroids are very useful for many, not all patients. For chronic use, I, like patients, parents, grandparents, don't like the idea of chronic daily use of topical cortisones. I mean, the bigger issue really is not a systemic effect, it's a local thinning of the skin, and that can happen, I can tell you, with any potency, low, medium, or high. So I tend to use a lot of these calcineurin inhibitors. You familiar with them? People in the room know what I'm talking about. Okay, technically I'm not supposed to do brand names, but I'm going to give you brand names because there are only 2 of them. One is Protopic and one is Elidel. Okay. Tacrolimus.
It's a long T word. One's for the face and one's for the body.
Oh, triamcinolone? Okay. Triamcinolone is a mid-potency cortisone preparation.
So you're saying that's bad for long-term use?
Well, daily for months and months and months, you need to guard against thinning of the skin. That's all.
Big issue.
Yep.
She has my daughter can scrape herself and her skin just peels.
Yeah, so that's where,
But we've been using that since diagnosis.
well, and that's where I would consider, for instance, using one of these non-steroid-based preparations. Now, for people who don't want to go down either of those paths, okay, to your question about other, quote, natural-type products, plain old coconut oil, plain old sunflower oil have mild anti-inflammatory properties. And I'm not saying they're going to be as potent as these other products. We'll use them for like our patients who have mild degrees of eczema. And for some of the families, it's a home run. For others, it ends up in their foods. No pun intended, no joke. So the answer is yes, there are options. And that's
Is that used for acne also?
no, Protopic's not. Oh, that's Proactive. That's Proactive. Now, one thing I will tell you about Protopic, tacrolimus, or Elidel, pimecrolimus. If you look at the structures of those compounds, they're off by one single molecule. Okay? There is an FDA boxed warning regarding the use of both of those products. They're not new medicines. The tacrolimus, which is an ointment only, Protopic, was released in March of 2001, and the Elidel, which is a cream-based, March of 2002. The concern the FDA had, first of all, a totally new class of topicals, which is why they were diligent in their classification. But on animal trials with the products, both of those products, they look for toxicities. And they literally overdose in these laboratory models to see what can happen. And the Protopic in particular, but Elidel certainly as well, are immunosuppressants if you get enough into the blood. So you have risk of infection. And I'm not trying to talk you out of these medicines at all, but I'm telling you, you're gonna if someone prescribes it and you look at the insert, you're going to wonder, as I tell my patient, I did it this week, prescribing it. I said, Mom, you're going to open the flyer, either that comes with the med or from the pharmacy, and you're going to wonder what on earth I prescribed this for your child for. But infection and lymphoma Everybody know what lymphoma is? Okay, that's a malignancy of our lymphatic system. The same medicine that is in the Protopic is used for immunosuppression by transplant physicians. You're trying to suppress the patient so they don't reject their organ. Good news. If they've had long-term immunosuppression, some of those patients develop lymphoma. And the primary treatment in that situation is decreasing the amount of immunosuppression. And in most cases, it goes away. So how does that relate to the topicals? As I not at all jokingly tell families, as long as your child doesn't like the flavor of the medicine so much that he or she is eating tubes of it daily with limited application in this particular situation, our face, we use it quite commonly on the face in the dermatomyositis patients, quite honestly, because I'm happier with that chronically than I am with long-term steroids on the face. And for some of them, it's very helpful. For others, as you folks know, they end up needing systemic therapies just like they would be getting for the systemic disease. One more question, then I'm going to have you remind me of number 2 and 1. Yes? Mm-hmm. No problem.
Is there a point at which she needs to stop using it because she actually ran out of the Elidel one night and that's what happened to her face?
She got more red.
She got the worst rash she's ever had in her life, and it was painful and it was itchy, and that was from missing 1 day of Elidel.
And how did you manage that?
We got her more Elidel.
Okay. Well, I will tell you an acute thing you can do, quite honestly, is, again, if you've got a low-potency steroid or not, a little bland, this is getting to one of your questions, what are the post-burn? I'll get to that. See, it's coming back. But just cool compresses and things like that. But the answer is no, as long as any of us is applying it to limited areas, and I'm literally saying not full body, because there's no question, if you have that degree of redness, full body, and you're applying anything on the skin, including Vaseline, that's going to be absorbed. So I'm not worried about that with that limited exposure.
How long can a child be on the Elidel?
Well, I'll tell you the official indication. Did you read the label? It says, indicated for twice daily use for up to 6 weeks. I'm not worried about it. I mean, again, knowing that and when I was still in Houston, we were one of the test sites, like many of my colleagues, studying that product as well as Protopic. I do not take money from the pharmaceutical companies, I will tell you either, other than for them to do trials. I mean, they pay my staff, for God's sake. But I'm telling you this not because of that affiliation. I wouldn't be worried. I would use that on my child, as I tell my parents now, more likely grandchild. So thank you for asking that. To your question about, okay, so the child is doing everything diligently and still ends up toasty. I mean, you're in Fort Worth. You've got the same bloody skies we do here. It's going to happen. So it's whatever, boy or girl? Okay, so whatever your son needs would be my answer. If it's really uncomfortable, I think, cooled. I like putting a lotion in the fridge. I think that's comfortable. Cool compresses are comfortable. I think using a non-steroidal like ibuprofen, again, if it's a really bad burn, that's a safe thing. Now, depending on your child's weight, I mean, if it's infant or a very young child, we end up dosing that on a milligram per kilo basis. If the child's able to take the over-the-counter is a 200 milligram pill. How old's your child? Weighs about 40 pounds. So let's say about 20 kilos. I'm pushing it a little bit there. So it's 10 per kilo. So a 200 milligram. Now, a 4-year-old is probably not going to be able to take a pill too easily, but they're liquids. So that would be okay. And again, it's really whatever they need from a comfort perspective. And then I think, if there's such degree of skin reddening that you're, like it's a burn, it's a sunburn, certainly pain control.
Predominantly facial.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say whatever he needs for pain control in the short run, and then I would say certainly diligent moisturizing. Does he peel readily? No. Yeah, so I think it's
the redness that comes with being outside, even when we do fully apply.
oh, see, and that in his baseline probably is some degree of redness as well.
Pink.
Pink. So what's probably happening there is not so much heat per se, but dilatation of the vessels that are already inflamed. So you're seeing an intensification of his baseline red, I'm betting, not having seen him, in which case, just cool him down. Is he uncomfortable when that's happening? Or he could care less? Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're looking at anything that would inherently predict damage to his skin if it's that, you know, if it's that momentary, it can be long-lasting, but dilatation of the vessels. It's a normal response any of us have to try to get rid of heat, quite honestly. So if you see him turn red after playing and then he's in after he's been inside for a half hour to a couple of hours, if he's back to baseline, that's what it is. And I don't remember your first question.
It was don't, and really.
Oh, yeah.
The don't was, we're seeing a lot of new products that are pushing anti-perspiration, water resistant, and a bunch of other things. And so is there any of these sunblocks or SPF treatments that you're like, or any other advice that you have that you're like, just don't do that?
Yeah, and that's a wonderful question. And the first thing that comes to mind is I'm unaware of any of that. That being said, this is one of these moments where I'm going to have to go do some research, but I've not read anything that's a specific don't, and I'm not just speaking specific to this group of conditions, but in general for public consumption or use. But that's a fabulous question.
Yeah, and so like everything's PABA free now, right? Or most doctors
Pretty
are
much so.
recommending that
Yep.
you go. Is there anything else that's revealed itself in recent history that is similar to that nature?
No, and for those who didn't hear, the whole issue about PABA, I mean, most of the sunscreens now, people have gotten away from that, and it's really because of more irritancy and allergic contact derm. I'll have to tell you, that's what was on my back as a medical student, floating in the rice pool and being toasted for $50. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. But the comment I made earlier about some of the sunscreens that contain nanoparticles, again, I don't think we're at the point where I can say don't use those products, but there are certainly patients of mine who ask about that, and I've probably not done an effective job in convincing them that my reading says they're okay. I'm still not saying don't use those products. I mean, the logic of their being included is better penetration in the skin and therefore, at least theoretically, better protection. But people who are concerned about them, it's penetration beyond that and nanoparticles getting in and affecting other cell function. Did I dance around that one sufficiently? Okay. Thank you for asking it. That's a great question. Yep. Here, I'll come back here.
So given that now in the South we're all covering up and putting sunscreen on and other things, what about vitamin D supplementation?
Yeah, so that's a great question about vitamin D supplementation. And as an example, one of the conditions I deal with is called xeroderma pigmentosum. And it's patients who are born with a genetic inability, in many cases, to repair UV damage, ultraviolet light damage to their DNA. Like they are destined to have a life of skin cancers and other malignancies. Those people ideally should never be out in the sun. I'll tell you happily, there's a camp I'm involved with. Does anyone know? Most people here from Texas? No? Okay. There's a wonderful camp just west of Brenham, and I don't get paid by them, called Camp for All, where we run a camp each year for kids with any type of skin disease. It's a national camp. We have about 70, 80 kids there. And for some crazy reason, our camp has the largest number of kids from around the country with XP. So in August, for God's sake. So as I tell the story, it's those of us who are working in the camp who are complaining bitterly about the sun and the heat. The kids could care less. But what do we do with those kids? Well, we have an indoor track for them. Virtually everything that the kids do outside during the daytime, we have inside. And then we have one night where we take them out and we have these glow sticks around their neck and they're doing zip lines and riding horses, and it's fantastic. And I bring them up because in that population, we absolutely have big concern about vitamin D deficiency and its consequence on bone health. And we're routinely following both on that, on those kids. Now, what about us? What about the patients that you're aware of? It really varies so much, again, getting back to your inherent skin type. It doesn't take a lot of time outside to generate the conversion of vitamin D in our skin to provide adequate protection. Okay? Again, if there are kids or grandkids who are essentially never outside, they're always covered, those kids, and I think honestly one of the recommendations of the American Academy of Pediatrics now is to, and I don't know if it's annual or at least is to check, it's a 25-hydroxy vitamin D. The 25-OH vitamin D. And the levels, interestingly, the Institute of Medicine, in terms of what is vitamin D deficiency, they vary a bit between adult and pediatric. In the pediatric levels, I won't bore you with the units, it's about 20. They think for adults it should be higher, but what that means to me is no one really knows. So I think it depends on the individual child, but again, depending on how much sun, I mean, as you might imagine, someone who's more fair-skinned is going to get more UV coming through. And when I say it doesn't take long, it's a matter of minutes in most cases, except for people who have a darker skin type inherently. You don't get as much UV through. So again, it's going to depend on the child, but that's a great, great question and totally pertinent. Check with your doc. Yep.
I just want to add to that we live somewhere where there's not a lot of sun, about 6 months of the year. We live somewhere in Vancouver, same weather as Seattle, so we don't get a lot of sun like Texas would, for instance. So I was told the same thing by our rheumatologist, and I actually asked to get her blood tested for her vitamin D levels, and she was deficient. So we've upped her levels just based exactly as you said on her person, her individual body, to bump her up to the level she needs to be at, just because where I live makes a big difference. So.
Great question. And again, that's another factor. Thank you. You're lucky you're in Vancouver. It's a really hideous place. It's so gorgeous. God. Well, winter? Is your winter like Seattle?
Worse this year. It was.
Oh, you've had terrible rain, right?
We actually
And
had
snow.
The first time in 20 years with the worst snow we've ever had. So, this is a great holiday.
Yeah, just come back in a month.
That's what I
Right? No, it's funny. I've been here. I think I mentioned 9 years from Houston, and with the new Children's Hospital and medical school, and one of my early younger associates who went back north, I will say, had never been out of Wisconsin, and when she was here for her first May, and it hit 90 degrees, and she asked me, she said, "So is this kind of how it's going to be?" And I went, "Well, sort of." I said, "It'll get worse, I promise you." I said, "But the good news is, when you hit 90 again, you're going to notice the difference." Isn't that the truth? Oh, it's miserable. Yes?
Girls with long hair, is that okay for like protecting their neck? Because like she'll wear a ball cap, which will help on her face, but her hair like covers her ears and her neck. Is that good enough?
Everybody hear that question? What color is her hair? Light brown hair. The reason I ask is it depends on the color of the hair. The darker hair types are going to provide more protection. In all honesty, if she's got thick hair, she's probably in good shape.
She doesn't.
Does not?
No.
Yeah, then she probably needs, either a cap with one of the, I don't know what you call those crazy things, but yeah, like a safari cap. I mean, those are fine. And what's that? French Foreign Legion, exactly. Or just put on some sunscreen.
Our doctors mentioned that she should wear sunscreen even like under these lights.
Good question. Doctor said wear sunscreen even under these lights. And there is, and this comes back to the population I was talking about earlier, the kids with a genetic difference, abnormality of DNA repair. They do have to in this light. And or in the schools, we'll have them put actually just a clear plastic cover, which actually kills not all, but a huge amount of the ultraviolet light exposure. And those families actually go meter the UV exposure. So I wouldn't be, for this population, so concerned about that per se from a practical standpoint. On the other hand, I remember professor of mine in dermatology who actually created one of the first sunscreens. And one of the patients came in and asked him, Dr. Knox was his name, and a very tall man, and she asked, when should I put sunscreen on, Dr. Knox? And he took his glasses off and looked down at her and said, "Madam, if you wake up and you're breathing, you should have your sunscreen on." And it sounds silly, but it's applicable. I mean, I really think, whether you have a sun sensitivity condition like dermatomyositis or lupus, or you're on a photosensitive drug, or not. I mean, I think it's a reasonable practice for us all to engage in at this point.
Is it important for them to put sunscreen on their legs and feet? Like if they're going to be in the pool, like we go for the pool, like they have 45 minutes they can be in the pool, and most of the time they're in the pool submerged except for, their head and up. Is it still important to put sunscreen on then?
The answer is ideally yes. And I mean, if you then talk about not so much just sun sensitivity from a condition like dermatomyositis, but if you look at, dear friend melanoma, the skin cancer you don't want, okay? With women in particular, huge number of that is on the legs. And it's because a lot of women are out, not in the pool always, but out stretching and getting sun. You and I, it's more torso. So I would answer yes, ideally.
Can sunscreen cause cancer?
And that gets back to the issue of these nanoparticles. And again, if you read the data, it's wonky at best. And in my book at this point, the answer is no. But I would say, just like the PABA thing, I'm sure there'll be some more data either totally exonerating those products or not.
Yeah, I was going to say there have been reports about some of the quote-unquote chemical sunscreens being hormone disruptors, which is a
That's
special
the-
issue for, I guess, for kids with JM.
Yeah, and those are, again, like I made, like the owns. Those are the ones where that's come up. Okay?
Is the science still kind of out on whether that's?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned earlier about the types of skin they have. Like, I'm Hispanic.
Right.
So my kids, my wife's one Caucasian.
Yep.
So, but they get very tan, and even it's funny that I've got 3 of them. The oldest one came out, she was darker. The middle one came out, she was lighter. The one with the JM, she's white girl, and so, but she still got a good tan in her summertime. So I'm just curious, that type of skin, because she has like the olive skin, is it more susceptible to sunburn or sun conditions, I guess?
Well, again, we talk about skin types, and it's 1 through 6, and 1 is your sort of prototypical blonde or redhead with blue eyes and white skin, down to the darkest African American, for instance, or black skin, and then there's gradation in between. And anybody can get a sunburn, but the people with lesser pigment and who like burn never tan, those are the ones who are at the greatest risk. But I would say the biggest risk is really sort of types 1, 2, 3. But I mean, I've seen people with darker skin types who get sunburn. Like, it can happen to anybody. Yep.
Well, my daughter, she got the oldest one. She got in the sun one time, and she's got her tan.
Gotcha. And then what he said is that his daughter gets out and she's got a nice copper tone tan, so to speak. And again, that provides her, that's a body response and certainly provides her some protection. But again, on the other hand, that's actually a sign, if you will, of excess sun, on the other hand.
This is going to be our last
Let me get
question.
one more.
Yeah,
Yep.
we got to wrap up.
Yep, thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time, by the way,
Yeah.
Dr. Levy.
No, this was fun.
But regarding sunscreen, 40 minutes, 80 minutes, all those kinds of things being equal, if somebody applies in the morning and then they're not in the sun until the afternoon, is the sunscreen that they applied in the morning still there, or is it just gone? Because I'm thinking about my daughter. We apply sunscreen before she goes to school. She may not, and that's, let's say, 7 o'clock. She may not go outside until 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Is she still good, or does she need to reapply?
That's a great question. And the efficacy, again, as currently measured, has waned. Okay? Great question. Thank you, guys. Enjoy your meeting.
For any of you who, if you have any questions, we'll be around. You'll see us at the conference. You can ask me. I am not a doctor, but I've ended up doing a lot of sunscreen research and stuff. And one of the things that I know they were talking about, the chemical that you can actually wash into clothes. I know we've used it before. It's especially effective if, like a white T-shirt, they'll tell you, usually does not. It has like I think an SPF of like 10, but when it gets wet, it goes down to like a 4. I know one of the ones that the most common one to find is called SunGuard. I think it's actually made by the people from who make RIT shoe dye. If you've ever seen that, little boxes in the supermarket, they're the same people who make this stuff. You can find that usually online. Some drugstores carry it. I usually bought it from Amazon, and it's pretty effective. You can wash it in. I usually wash it into all my kids' T-shirts and my T-shirts and stuff at the beginning of the summer, and I'll do it again maybe a month or 2 later. It usually lasts. I think they'd say it lasts about 10 washes. So it's called SunGuard. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's by RIT, the people who make shoe dye. That's at SunGuard. Yep. Yeah, it's like $5 a box.